Welcome to the Holland Roofing Group's Specific Fall Protection Procedures Program. So why did we create this program? After all, you've already been through an orientation. Most of you have been through an OSHA 10-hour class, and we've spent a lot of time discussing fall protection. Well, it's simple. Why did we create this program? There's an evidence of need. If you look at the OSHA citations that Holland Roofing and its subcontractors have received in the past 2 years, they've totaled over $90,425 in penalties. In every case, individuals failed to follow basic fall protection procedures that were in place with equipment that was on site. In fact, just 4 fall injuries cost over $1 million in lost time and medical costs. Total costs for all fall injuries are obviously considerably higher. This has a dramatic effect on Holland's insurance premiums. Several employees were injured so badly that they will never be able to work in the roofing industry again, which is a shame because as a result, Holland has lost a wealth of experience and the families of those injured workers have suffered substantially as well. A quick glance at the site audits that we've conducted recently on our jobs shows that a regular failure to follow Holland's procedures exists. If you combine that with the recent rash of OSHA inspections, it becomes obvious that Holland needs to step up its game on fall protection. 100% compliance with the OSHA standard is like getting a D on a test. It's simply not acceptable. Therefore, Holland's procedures are designed to raise that grade to an A. An A assures that all Holland employees get to enjoy the fruits of their work without injury or worse. In the words of Jackie Stewart, it takes leadership to improve safety. It's very important to keep that in mind. So what are the objectives of this class? At the completion of the course, you should be able to explain how to properly set up and use a ladder, both extensions and step ladders, the requirements necessary for signalers who are loading or unloading jobs, how to set up a proper corridor from the ladder to the warning lines, how to properly put on a harness, how to set up and maintain a warning line system, the proper way to set up the Holland Roofing trash removal system, the different types of anchorage points that can be used, the proper use of Holland's fall protection carts, preventing falls on the same level, which contributes substantially to our insurance premiums, and how to properly use a roofing tractor. There will be a test following this presentation, which will require you to pass 70% of the answers correctly in order to return to work on Holland Roofing jobs. Remember the first rule. Before continuing, it's important to state that Holland Roofing follows a 100% tie-off rule on every job. Safety monitors are not to be used. This rule has been in effect for almost 15 years. Falls can occur almost instantly. In this picture, you see 3 workers who failed for just a second to follow the rules with terrible consequences to them and their loved ones. We're going to start this class with our discussion of ladders. First, let's talk about extension ladders. Our fall protection procedures start with the initial job setup.
Okay.
Remember, it takes 2 employees to properly set up an extension ladder. One employee must hold the ladder while the other climbs and secures the ladder to the roof line as is shown in this video.
Down, and then you'll be done.
The reverse procedure must be followed when the ladder is taken down. Extension ladders should always be set up at an angle of 75 degrees. That is 1 foot out for every 4 feet of working height of the ladder. Extension ladders must be tied at the top and the ladder must extend 3 feet above the roof. It's easy to determine if that is the case if you can see 3 rungs above the roof line. Step ladders are another issue. They must always be fully opened and the spreader mechanism completely engaged. Step ladders must never be used as straight ladders. They will kick out because the feet are not designed for that purpose. When step ladders are not in use, they should be closed and laid down, not left open or leaning against a wall. They should also be inspected before they're used each time. Also remember, you cannot stand on the top or the first rung of a step ladder. Remember, falls from as little as 6 feet can result in death or serious injury. Another means of getting to rooftops is stair towers. Holland Roofing uses stair towers to access some roofs. They are not covered under fall protection. They are covered in the CFR under Subpart L, which is the scaffolding standard. Stair towers permit many people to access and egress a rooftop, particularly one that is higher than is comfortable to use a standard extension ladder. Stair towers must be inspected daily by the competent person, just as scaffolds must, and the appropriate tag initialed and dated. Every break in elevation must have a stairway or ladder at the points of access, where there is an elevation break of 19 inches or more. Let me illustrate that. Break in elevation would be anything where there's a step of 19 inches. You must have something there to make this step. This is not acceptable under the OSHA standard. Here are some examples of how to protect step-ups and step-downs properly. On the left, you have a ladder located at the parapet wall. When the employee climbs the ladder to the top of the parapet, there is a ladder in place, appropriately tied off, for that employee to descend to the roof. In at least one instance, we had an employee jump nearly 4 feet from the top of a wall to the roof and sustain a serious injury that took him out of work for at least 6 months and caused a tremendous premium to be paid by his company. Second way of reaching the roof would be from a stair tower, where, as you can see here, we have steps that we have made that allow you to descend from the top of the stair tower platform to the roof. These two methods will work in most cases. In the picture on the left, you could substitute a pile of insulation high enough to act as a step if there is no step ladder available. You cannot use cans of glue or cement blocks or other unstable means to descend from the rooftop to the roof. Crane signaler in all cases must be trained and licensed to perform these tasks. You know that we do provide licenses for people. We provide internal training for that purpose. If there is no parapet wall on the roof that is high enough to serve as a guardrail, the signal person must be tied off. In this case, the anchorage point is a plate attached to the deck. Since mechanical equipment is being used, these warning lines are set at 10 feet from the edge. When you're loading the job, once the ladder is erected and the signal person is tied off or protected from falling by a parapet wall or personal fall arrest system, the materials can then be lifted to the roof or lowered back down to the ground. The initial uploads should be the safety materials, and they should also be the last materials downloaded. In that way, all roofers are protected while the roofing materials are raised to the roof. Please note in this video that the area under the lift zone is not properly protected. The red danger tape should be connected to cones near the front of the truck. There should always be an entry corridor from the ladder to the warning lines on the roof. There are two key ways to build it, and they're illustrated below. On the left, you see cones being used along with warning lines to make a corridor from the ladder to the actual warning line itself. Okay, cones and warning lines from the ladder are illustrated on the left. On the right, you see the use of cattle gates from the ladder. Not every company has these. However, they are all available from U.S. Fall Protection and can be acquired easily. They are a lot more stable than just using cones and warning lines, but either method is acceptable. In both cases, there must be a line which closes off the end of both at the warning line. Fall protection methods. You all know that there are three generally accepted methods of preventing falls from height. First is guardrails, and guardrails must have a top rail, a mid rail, and a toe board, as in this picture. The second method of fall protection that we use is personal fall protection systems, otherwise known as PFAS. You see illustrated here the standard personal fall arrest system that is available through U.S. Fall Protection. It contains a harness with tongue buckle leg straps, a 6-foot shock absorbing lanyard, a 50-foot rope, a rope grab, a carabiner that can be used to attach the rope to an anchorage above, an approved anchorage, and a self-rescue strap, which is very helpful in the event there is a fall while using this system. A container to hold everything. This can either be a bag or it could be a bucket. It is the only purpose for which these bags or buckets should be used. There is no reason for components of fall protection kits to be left lying loose in the back of a truck. The third method of fall protection is safety nets. Because of the difficulty of using nets on roofing jobs and the requirements required for inspection and setup, Holland Roofing does not use them. Next, I'd like to talk about putting on a harness.
Yeah. Okay.
Please note, in this video, the employee first puts the harness over each shoulder, then attaches the chest strap, which should be tightened in order to keep the shoulder straps from slipping off in the event of a fall. The last thing the employee does is fastens the leg straps around each leg and tightens them to the point where he can fit his hand between his body and the leg strap. If you do this, the harness is properly being worn. Everyone on the roof should be knowledgeable about how to put a harness on. In order to properly use a harness or a personal fall arrest system, we have to have a discussion of anchorage points. At Holland Roofing, we use a variety of anchorage points. The general rule in OSHA CFR 1926 subpart M, which is the fall protection standard, is that an anchor point must be capable of withstanding a force of 5,000 pounds unless it's designed by a qualified person, in which case it must withstand 2 times the expected force load. This is the definition that's commonly used when horizontal lifeline systems are in use. The standard also requires that the maximum arresting force must be limited to 1,800 pounds or less. There are situations where the anchorage point included in a fall protection kit will not meet either of these requirements. You need to check with management for a proper way to anchor if that is the case on your job. To meet unusual requirements, there are a number of methods that can be used to comply with the standard. The picture on the left shows the standard screw-down anchor using a self-retracting, over-the-edge retractable lanyard. Standard screw-down anchors must have all holes filled with screws. In the center we have a standing seam anchor, which is useful to tie off to standing seams on roofs. On the right, we show a beam strap being wrapped around a curb. Please note that the strap is fastened through itself. You cannot use a rope with the double locking snap hook wrapped around back on itself. That is not a correct anchorage. We also use roofing carts, and we have a number of them. This is the standard Eagle 3 cart that Holland uses. Eagle 3 is the brand. The newer ones that we've been getting recently are yellow, but they are identical to the red ones that have been in use for some time. To use them properly, they must be set back 15 feet from the edge and parallel to the roof edge. They cannot be any closer than 15 feet. The brakes on both wheels must be set to use properly. Only the connectors in the center may be used for fall arrest. Lifting hooks may be used for fall restraint only. Note, to tie off 3 workers, you must load 500 pounds of ballast onto the cart. Without the ballast, only 2 workers may be tied off for fall arrest. And remember, they must be tied off to the portion in the center. This is the proper way to use a roofing cart. You will notice in this video that there's only one self-retracting lanyard attached to the cart. It's a type that Holland is phasing out and should be replaced with a unit designed for over-the-edge protection. However, at the time this video was taken, these were the only self-retracting lanyards that were available at this company. The new units look like this. You'll note that there is a shock absorbing lanyard that goes over the edge and helps to reduce the fall forces against the edge, preventing the lanyard from being cut as it rubs across the edge. The example in use here is the Multi Dynamics either 20 or 30 foot Warthog, also available through U.S. Fall Protection. If you're using powered tractors, there are 2 main rules. The first is that warning lines must be set back 10 feet from the edge. The second rule is that these tractors should always be driven parallel to the roof edge, as in this video. This is what results when you fail to follow the rules when driving tractors. Only quick reaction by the driver and luck on the ground that there was no one underneath where this fell prevented this from becoming a true tragedy. As it is, a very expensive tractor needed to be replaced. Several years ago, Holland Roofing had an employee seriously injured while dropping trash from the roof. He fell a distance of 32 feet. As a result of this incident, we developed a system to be used whenever trash is being dropped from the roof either into a dumpster or to the ground. It's pictured on this slide to the left. It is engineered and meets all the OSHA standards for its purpose. There are some very interesting features of the design of this system, and there are specific rules for properly setting them up. If you look carefully at this system in the front, you will see that there are two poles that extend the width of the system. They are held in place by locks that can screw tight and can be adjusted to various widths depending on the size of the area below. You can also attach a chute to these if that is required on your job. The rear plates must always be placed as shown, which is the long edge of the plate should be facing the roof edge, whether it's a drip edge or a parapet wall. The front plates are adjustable to account for parapet walls or drip edge installation. You'll note that there is an 18-inch overhang from where the front edge attaches to the plates. That's designed so that you have a number of ways to configure this system depending on the roof you're on. In the rear, please note there are weights at the back end of each of these rails that need to be in the back in order for it to function properly. If there is no parapet wall present and you're using a drip edge, a wood block should be welded to the roof membrane as a stop to prevent the system from sliding, as is indicated in this picture. When you're done, simply cut the membrane on top of the block, remove the block, and you're fine. If this system is not used, whoever is dumping trash must be 100% tied off at all times. Those are the only two ways you can drop trash from the roof. There are many different forms of holes that you can find on the roof. Three of the most common are pictured on this slide. The first is the common skylight. There are no skylights in existence that are manufactured with permanent fall protection involved in them. You can add systems to them, but no manufacturer makes a skylight which will meet the fall protection standard. In the center, you have roof hatches, which are common on roofs. Normally, these should be left closed. However, in many cases, they're not, and they do constitute a hole. To the right, you see the standard HVAC curb, which is also a hole once the decking is cut out. OSHA defines a hole as any opening that is 2 inches in its smallest dimension. Openings that meet this definition must always be protected. So how do you do that? Let's look at the three specific holes we saw in the last slide. There are several methods that we can use to protect holes. For example, the skylight can be protected with guardrails, as indicated in this picture, where we use pre-manufactured freestanding guardrail systems. In the center, we have self-closing hatch kits that can be attached to each hatch and have a self-closing gate that when the individual employee exits the hatch, closes and makes that hatch safe and protects the hole. It is a guardrail around the hole. The third means would be to cover the hole, but there are some rules that apply in this case. The first is covers must be capable of withstanding 2 times the intended force load. Covers must also be fastened. They either need to be screwed down or they can be cleated so they can't be moved. And third, they should either be marked hole or cover or painted orange in order to meet the fall protection standard. Falls to the same level are a major problem in all companies that are working at heights. However, at Holland, we've had a number of reported OSHA recordables that resulted in falls to the same level. They resulted in strains and sprains, cuts and stitches, surgery, and lost time. The latest accident we had involving a fall to the same level was on 12/26/19, where an employee slipped on ice and fell. All could have been prevented. The easiest way to prevent these incidents is to be vigilant as to hazards and report what you see to your fellow crew members. Managers should be especially mindful of the hazards of their job sites, and they should warn employees on their crew about these hazards before beginning work. Let's take a look at some pictures that came from actual job sites. In this picture, you can see a Holland roofing scaffold improperly set up on a job. Note, there's a definite lead to the right. There is no ladder access. You can't see it in this picture, but there's a heavy log attached over the big tree limb at the left by a rope, which I guess is designed to act as a ballast to keep it from falling over. This is unacceptable and dangerous. Let's look at a picture of a anchorage point that's improperly attached to the roof. As you can see, in this particular anchorage, there are 3 units tied to one D-ring. That's not acceptable. You can only have one individual tied off at a time to one single anchorage. Secondly, there is a problem in this case in that there are only 8 screws used to fasten the anchor to the deck. All screw holes must be used at all times. The next picture shows an improper attachment to an HVAC curb. The rope is tied back into itself. A web strap must be used. If you look carefully, you'll see that the rope is actually tied back through the double locking snap hook. That is an improper way to attach to an HVAC curb. You must use a strap. This is a picture of an employee improperly tied off to a shingled roof using a anchor point positioned near the top of the roof and a rope. This is improper. The use of a rope with this anchor will allow the worker to fall off the left edge in addition to the bottom. Instead, a self-retracting lanyard, SRL, designed for over-the-edge work should be used instead of a rope. The anchor should also be moved to prevent falling off any edge. Here's a picture of an employee using one of our standard roofing carts. Let's talk about it for just a second. This picture clearly shows that the fall protection cart is closer than 15 feet to the roof edge. The manufacturer requires the cart to be back 15 feet from the edge if it's going to function properly. This is another example of an improper tie-off that was recorded on a job site audit. In this picture, an employee is tied off to a vent pipe. This is not an acceptable anchorage point. In addition, he is also tied off using a rope tied back on itself, compounding the error. Both of these are unsafe practices. Taken together, this is a recipe for serious trouble. On this slide, we have 2 photographs that were taken of site audits showing employees outside the warning lines. In the first photo, 2 employees are sitting on the roof edge outside the lines. Please note, both of them are wearing harnesses, but neither is tied off. This has been the cause of at least 4 OSHA citations this year. The second photograph shows a worker working outside the warning lines, but the parapet wall is not high enough to serve as a guardrail. This is definitely a violation of the standard. And we see these two events on a regular basis when we conduct site audits. What we have shown in the preceding pictures are only a small portion of what was reported just for fall protection on the site audits. It is absolutely imperative that every employee, from labor to management, understands and follows these Holland roofing procedures to the letter. Only when everyone is on board can we turn fall protection from an F or a D to an A. You will now be given a quiz on what we have gone over in this presentation. Remember, you need a score of 70 to pass. Good luck.